What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Point Podcast. My name's Lawson Clary. I'm the executive pastor here at 5 Point Church, and I am joined by Angela Lamb, who I like calling her our resident theologian. So we're going to be talking today about a really tough topic, and I just want to tell our pastor, Pastor Dean, thank you so much for assigning Angela and I this task of talking about the 70 weeks in Daniel.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty heavy task because by my reckoning, this is the first time Pastor Dean has not been on the Point. So we know we have big shoes to fill today.
That's right.
Super simple, clear topic in the Bible to discuss.
If y'all can't hear our sarcasm, you can see it in our faces. We are being absolutely sarcastic because this is a highly debated set of scripture here. And Pastor Dean, just thank you so much for allowing us to be able to talk about this and trusting us with that.
Also, to note, this is a great passage for people that did very well at math in school.
Yes.
A lot of math involved today.
So as we math this out. All right, Angela. So I'm going to let you kind of take the lead on this and just break down exactly what we're talking about whenever we're talking about Daniel 9:24 through 27. What are we addressing here?
Yeah, so this is a passage of prophecy from Daniel, and it can be difficult to interpret and has been interpreted in a lot of different ways. But I believe what we're going to focus on today is getting us to a period of time that we would call the Tribulation and the different views on that. So Daniel is receiving a message from Gabriel about the end times, and it's basically mapping out the timeline of what's to come in the future to Daniel. We know Daniel 9, Daniel 11 is essentially a timeline of all of world history, and it's been proven time and time again. So there are a lot of dates and numbers in here that we can interpret in the past very accurately, which I think is kind of amazing.
Yeah. So whenever we math this out, kind of explain to us the process of these 70 weeks. I
think the first thing we have to define is what is a week. Okay. Because we consider a week as Sunday through Saturday. But what Daniel has in mind here is a set of 7, and he's speaking in years. Right. So a week is 7 years. So 70 weeks is 490 years. Super simple, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which he would have just used the whole numbers. So he is listing out, there's going to be so many weeks for this to happen, then so many weeks for this to happen, but all of those weeks are periods of 7 years.
Okay.
Yep.
So Angela, let's kind of take everybody through what is the time period of the 70 weeks. Let's go ahead and break that down now.
Yeah, so we are going to start on our timeline. We know that at the time of writing this, Daniel is actually in exile in Babylon. So he is receiving all of these visions, not in Jerusalem back in the land, but the people of God are in exile, not back in the land. And so we know they're in exile for roughly 70 years, and there's a lot of places in the Bible, Jeremiah, where you can see that mapped out as pretty accurate. So the first week, or we're going to get the timeline started, is going to be one of the decrees to go back and start rebuilding in the land when the exiles are going to start to return. And there's some debate over which one of that is. We know in the Bible, we actually see 4 decrees to go back to the land. The first being Cyrus in 538, all the way up into the 400s when Artaxerxes sent Nehemiah to build the wall. Right. So we can debate back and forth on which one starts the timeline, but we're just going to generally say when the exiles return. Right. And so the first 7 weeks is spent just, rebuilding the land. We're going to rebuild the temple. We're going to rebuild the wall. We're going to re-inhabit the land and get back to life as it was in Israel. And then there are 62 weeks after that Daniel mentions, and this is going to carry us all the way up through the rest of the Old Testament, through that 400 years of silence where there is no fresh prophetic uttering in the land. And the math here, really interesting, between the 7 weeks to rebuild and the 62 weeks that he mentions, that 483 years. And the math on this is incredible. And I know we had looked yesterday at people that study calendars and study lunar calendars and everything. This takes us up pretty perfectly, amazingly, to Jesus.
That's right.
And whether that lands on the day of the triumphal entry or the day of the crucifixion or
Some people even say his baptism.
Or his baptism, but it's a miracle that 480 years is going to get us right smack dab in that, 30 AD, 27 to 30 AD time period. So the first 69 years, this first 483 years, not a lot of debate over this outside of the exact date.
Which decree it comes off of. Yes, that's the debate.
Where we start to get a little varied here is dealing with Daniel's 70th week. What happens in that 70th week? And would you mind reading? Let's just read maybe verse 26 on, so that we can have that in our minds.
So 26 and 27, do you want me to hit those or just 26?
I think so.
Okay. So I'm going to start in 26. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you right there because I do want to point out two things in that verse that are important. The anointed one being cut off, we do understand that is the crucifixion of the Messiah.
Right.
The anointed one being cut off from his people. And then we get language here starting about destruction for the land. And I know Sunday, just this past week, we went into great depths through Josephus and the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus, which is one of the images I think we need to keep in mind as we continue looking at this.
That's good. Yeah. It's really good. All right, so let's continue on in 27. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate, until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator.
So that's really clear, right? Exactly what that means. I think, and we know that there are 4, 5, 6 frameworks and theories for this, but I think there's really two main things we got to look at. We do understand this to be referring to a time of great tribulation, or the tribulation, capital T. And as we've gone through Revelation and we've looked at all of the main views, the two that really stand out in this verse is the preterist and the futurist.
Right.
And so a preterist is going to naturally take this period of 7 weeks. It is split into 3.5 years and 3.5 years as being the tribulation, but that as having already happened back in, around 70 AD.
Yep.
With the destruction of Jerusalem, because we know that was a time of great tribulation. It was awful. I know some of the imagery that we read was definitely heartbreaking. And so that definitely looks like it would fulfill part of this. Right. There are cracks in that though, because, is Titus this awful prince who is to come? Some would say yes. Is it another Roman ruler? Possibly. But they would see this as having primarily already been fulfilled. The futurist, on the other hand, is going to take this 70th week and put it in the future, and they would say we are living right now in the gap between weeks 69 and 70, which we have called the church age.
Right.
There's kind of questions with both, and there's very good arguments for both. But I think what is important to focus on is that God has ordained the times to carry about his purposes perfectly, and we can trust in him in that.
Right.
Whether it's going to start tomorrow, or whether it happened 2,000 years ago, or whether it's going to happen 5,000 years in the future, personally don't think that's likely. Yeah. But we do see that he has laid out his timeline for his people, however it will play out.
Yep. It's a good word, Angela. So in saying that, why would there be precedent for the gap in that? Because you and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, because at the beginning there's also, so kind of break that down just a little bit there.
Well, the argument is Daniel doesn't say, and then after a period of time there's going to be a gap. And so it is easy to look at that and say, well, why do we think there's a gap? But in this great timeline, there have already been gaps from the moment of Daniel receiving this prophecy to the degree to return. There's an unknown period of time there,
right?
And that is debated. And then even if you hold to a 70 AD fulfillment of this, if the end of that 69th week was the death and crucifixion of Jesus, you're still looking at a 40-year gap before this fulfills. So both really support the need for a gap there. There's also kind of a third party that would take a lot of these numbers as symbolic. And so that 70th week is not another 7 years, is the period of time that will follow the 69th week. It's hard to say for sure. It's not very concrete for us. So I think what's important to remember here that Pastor's been saying since we started Revelation back in July is your eschatology isn't grounds to judge someone's theology fully, because there is a lot of room for your own responsible interpretation of the scriptures, having all of the facts.
That's exactly right. As I think through this, as I hear you talk, it just makes me think, okay, this is something that gives us a glimpse, but it doesn't give the whole picture.
No.
And this is something through which people have debated for centuries upon centuries, but it's not anything that should be divisive.
No, absolutely not. And I think we see that so often as people want to divide over things that are less than important. There are certain things that I will hold with a closed fist, that I will stand up and debate over and maybe fight over in a very Christ-like manner.
Right.
Even when it comes to eschatology, we discussed that, what is important? Christ is returning. In the future,
Absolutely.
we know he's going to come back, establish his kingdom on earth, death will be defeated, all of those hopeful things that we can hold on to. The timelines and the date setting and the exact nature and who is the Antichrist and all of that, it's interesting. And I do feel like as we mature, we should form an opinion of these things, but it is nothing to divide the people of God over at all. Because if it was, we know the scriptures would be clearer.
That's right.
Yep.
So as Pastor continues to dig into Revelation, we're going to come up more and more on these types of questions. Yeah. And it's great to dig into, but it's nothing that should be divisive. And so what we want to do, and Angela's done a great job today of just giving several viewpoints as to what the 70 weeks mean. Angela, is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do want to, because we didn't really connect this to Revelation very well, because we know this past week we just got into Revelation 5 with the horsemen. I know we're also in Zechariah, and we're pulling all of these things in the Bible together. So Daniel's 70th week is essentially what we will be studying all the way up until Revelation 19. So thinking about this, we are going to, as a church, and Pastor Dean I know is working very hard to, over the next weeks, months, however long it takes, really start to help this make sense as the different parties view it. And then let people decide where they land on it based on all of the information we have.
That's great. Thank you for tying that together, Angela. So, well, I think that kind of wraps up our time on the Point podcast today. I want to tell you guys thank you for listening and watching, and just look forward to Pastor Dean being back on it next week, and Angela and I getting a week off from that after such a great, tough topic here with 70 weeks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Angela.
Thanks, Lawson.
Have a great day, everybody.